The Hrud are a Xenos species who can manipulate the flow of time. But how? Is that shown in their weapons and ships? How does it work against the void shields of the Astartes ships and the armour of the Iron Warriors? Let's begin, and welcome heretics. Join me as we stare into the timeless depths of the warp, where all stories are already written. Now, witness 40k forbidden knowledge, as we join the Primarch Perturabo and his Iron Warriors facing the Hrud. The Hrud were insatiable diggers, tunnelling hundreds of kilometres of tubular warrens through the rock of the planets they dominated. How they did it was open to conjecture. The Iron Warriors had found nothing that resembled digging machines. The walls were uneven but glacially surfaced, seemingly impervious to the constant tremors that beset Hrud worlds. They rose and fell slightly, twisting about like the guts of an immense creature. With their time abilities, maybe that's how they do it, shaping the rock, moving it backwards and forwards through time. And the Hrud rarely used doors. Each chamber and tunnel of their warrens ran into the next. The way bulged into a large chamber filled with racks of hollow, honeycomb shelving made from some kind of resin. Sheets of cured mycelium were stacked in roughly half of them. And when the Hrud meet the Iron Warriors, the Hrud were almost impossible to spot behind the entropic fields generated by their bizarre biology. The breaking time's flow acted like a lens, bending light around them. When they were stationary, they were virtually invisible. When they moved, they seemed to traverse space without crossing it. Flickers of black at the heart of a column of shimmering air. Sight was rarely the most reliable way to detect them. And as the Iron Warriors engage and fire their mass-reactive rounds, bolts streaked at the aliens. Upon encountering the thing's time field, they sped on to unbelievable speeds, or they detonated prematurely as the explosive inside the munition decayed, or they came apart in rains of metal atoms. The effect of the Hrud on their surroundings was unpredictable. A spaceman stood close by one, might age 1,000 years in a minute, and yet his comrade be unaffected. The Hrud's own artifacts did seem immune to these effects. And as the fighting continues, a green bolt of phasic plasma wicked through the air, its track uncertain as it blinked in and out of existence. It materialised inside a warrior of Squad 9, punching out through his backplate and pack in a spray of blood and steam. Elsewhere, Hrud phasic plasma materialised in the bodies of men, bypassing their armour and killing them outright. However, where the Astartes had built shields, and the plasma impacted directly, they were thick enough to stop it, though they were soon peppered with holes. A Typhon siege tank was mobbed by the indistinct outlines of the Hrud. There was a flash, and they stepped away, leaving a rusted skeleton behind. So you'll see the effects are mainly sort of backwards or forwards in time on things, and decaying the tank down to that, or making one of the bullets from the bolters falter. A phalanx of dreadnoughts rushed out from behind, only to be felled by searing stabs of focused temporal vortices that rotted them from the inside out. Their chassis collapsed, thinned by oxidation. Listening back to this, I meant to say thinned by oxidation, and a thin organic gruel spilled onto the ground from their sarcophagi. And even the guns themselves can be hidden by this Xenos filth, as Hrud weaponry concealed in the very fabric of space by unclean means opened fire. The cannons turned from the vehicle onto the legionaries, ripping them to shreds as part of them were displaced in time. Warriors fell, fused with the remains of others, as they were shunted thousandths of a second along their own time stream and out of synchronicity with the planet's motion. Screeching Hrud warriors appeared from folds in the air, each wielding twinned blades of light that smoked with entropic dissolution. They flickered and leapt from place to place. The munitions poured in their direction, hitting naught but thin air, or wasted by the being's native time fields, before they could detonate. Weapons fell to pieces as they encountered Hrud blades. Warriors speared by unearthly swords exploded, their bodies forced into impossible shapes. Others aged backwards, flushed with vigour for a second, before dying in agony as their bodies gorily rejected their implants. A band of Hrud advanced before the horde and came to the void shield, its barely perceptible shimmer flaring brightly as the aliens encountered it. A crackling boom preceded the shield's collapse as it burned itself out. The mountain shook. The generators are overloaded. How is that possible? Said Zolan. More Hrud advanced from the shimmering curtain, and these were all of the soldier caste, and we know that there are more than just them present, as we are told an Iron Warrior finds a room full of Hrud. But these were no fighters. The young, the old, the infirm, he guessed. One raised its hand on the end of a snaking arm. A gesture of surrender, perhaps. Strange lights surrounded them, and odd, flexible-limbed walkers staggered in the midst of their throng. Half of these bore strange bulbous cannons, and they advanced to range and set themselves squarely into the ground, opening fire not many metres from the edge of the light curtain. Glimmering energy loops caressed the wall, shearing off the barrels of guns and toppling buttressing in the shower of crumbling stone. In space, where the Hrud also fight the Iron Warriors, an escort was caught in an entropy beam. All matter within the compass of its temporal field forced it into an unvarying baseline heat state. Atoms dispersed with the radioactive rush of fleeing neutrons. The craft collapsed, leaving behind it a brief window into the death of the universe. Hrud ships hung in a petal defensive arrangement directly over the underground city. The ships were indistinct smears, nearly invisible behind their layers of shifting time fields. Solid munitions impacted these temporal wavefronts, vanishing as bright bursts of annihilated matter. Only the las beams and nova shells, the latter detonated close by the ships to avoid their simpler brethren's fate, seemed to penetrate the Hrud's esoteric shielding. From their flaring weapons blisters came temporal rays that enveloped the ships of the Iron Warriors and spirited them forwards into the death of all things. The migration ship came next. It was a weird agglomeration of plated fungal matter, so far as could be discerned through their null time-blind shields. Hundreds of these slipped through the Legion picket fleets, bringing in the subsector, and then the planets after. It's at this point that the planet itself begins to move. I was hoping for a giant Hrud or a mech Hrud at least. But it's something else. The city, said Forex. The entire city is moving. Gugan trembled on its axis as the Hrud capital Warren broke free from the bedrock. Blinding veils of white light propelled it upwards, pushing the impossible mass into orbit, using the substance of the world as fuel. A sea of magma boiled where it had torn itself from the ground. Still, the Iron Warriors fleet rained down onto the surface their fire, opening them up more wounds, but these were mere puddles of fire compared to the ocean the Hrud themselves had gouged into the rocky flesh of their world. Teardrops of lava plummeted from the underside of the capital Warren. That thing's the size of a continent, said Forex, my lord, and he looked on with mounting horror as the Hrud ships fell into formation with the giant vessel floating up from the surface of Gugan. They rotated around the city Warren, forming a hollow cube. Painfully bright arcs of light leapt from their scabrous hulls and joined them to the city's ship. A sickening flicker surrounded the Hrud vessels, their image smeared on the hololith, and they blinked out of existence. Where the Hrud vessels had been, space was convulsing. We have a temporal collapse, one shouted, and it does have some interesting effects on the area. Here's two. A servitor vanished, replaced by the man he used to be. His reborn face insane with the shock as he shook off mechanical components and stood unscarred. Of course, the irony and the black humour here is in the fact that they'll probably just grab this wholly replaced human and turn him back into a servitor. Some of the crew of the ship also disappeared. Others collapsed into a cloud of black carbon dust. And the sun, it also affects the sun. Nameless but for a string of astrogation numbers. It had swollen to double its size, accelerated out of the main sequence, and interstellar senescence. It appeared that even stars were not free from the Hrud's devastating influence. The warriors under Perturabo plan to go after the Hrud to hunt down this migration of them, but they are distracted as Perturabo hears that his homeworld of Olympia has tried to break away from the Imperium, so he breaks off pursuit and decides to deal with that. On that note, friends, we'll look to wrap up today's video looking at the Hrud and their weapons. I hope you got some insights there from the narrative. I particularly like the Hrud ship pulling out of the ground. Let me know what you think to the lore. Drop me a comment down below.